Hello and welcome to the Massive Impact Podcast, episode 001. I am your host, Patrick Wacks, and I have a very special guest sitting in the VIRATA Group office today. My wife, Margot Wacks, has joined, and we're going to do kind of a freestyle Q&A session to kind of launch this podcast, and we'll get into it a little bit more at the end of the show, but the reason for this podcast is to just give nuggets of manufacturing wisdom that I've picked up on in the last 23 years or so that hopefully we can share with you to make a massive impact. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Margot.
Hi, thanks for letting me join today. I think when we were discussing the podcast and your goals, we were discussing about making engineering a little bit more palatable for the average person. I'm not an engineer, I'm in the medical field, and I often, in our 14 years of marriage, have had to ask him exactly what he is talking about when he speaks engineering. So that's part of my goal of being on the podcast today. I think one of the greatest gifts of our marriage is we're exact opposites. So if you turn the mugs around, you can see that. I've got a very artistic mug. He's got a world's best boss mug. But that's one of the things is that we're able to play off of that with each other. So I wanted to ask and have you share a little bit more about your background, where you went to school, and why you chose engineering.
Okay, so I am a Buckeye. Went to Ohio State, Columbus, Ohio. I was guided into engineering by my folks. I really
Your dad literally dropped you off and said, "Go into engineering," right?
yes.
Perfect.
I was trying to be soft about it, but yes, I didn't have the direction. I didn't know what I wanted. Um, so I decided to declare undecided in engineering my freshman year at Ohio State. And after kind of getting acclimated with each of the disciplines, industrial engineering seemed to just be the most diverse. I could go into manufacturing, distribution, a hospital, a service industry. It didn't matter. And that's kind of how my brain works is I don't like monotony. I like a different challenge daily or weekly. I'm not a cubicle type person. I can't do that. Um, as well, my whole life, I've always looked for the most direct route for the best result. And industrial engineering does that. So that's how I landed on industrial.
And when we talk about engineering, what does that mean as an industrial engineer? And it took like 5 years of our marriage for me to understand what you do. What would you describe an industrial engineer, your role and your goals are?
Yeah, so great question. And by the way, I didn't have access to these questions. So she's hitting me,
Unscripted.
yes, hitting me blind here. Um, a lot of people think industrial engineering has to do with architecture. It does not. I don't design products. I design processes, or a better way to say it is we engineer or improve upon a process. So a process could be a value stream. What's a value stream? That's everything from order entry in a plant all the way to, scheduling. Um, of course, supply chain would come before all of that, but dropping the order onto the floor and then all the gymnastics that you have to go through and gyrations to make that part is the process. And I've got my team and I, a keen eye for finding the waste in the process and extracting it. And if you can do that, then you can actually reduce a cost of a good by the most that's possible. So that's what we do in a nutshell. Understand it better?
So breaking that all down, because the way your mother described it when I first met your mother was that you just went into the plant and you just cleaned it up, just gave it a little cleaneroo. And that was, I mean, now I understand after having lived with you all these years, but basically we met, you were working at a pizza plant and you went into that plant. What did you do and how did you do it?
Yeah. So the pizza plant ran several different SKUs, several different products. And it was really about standardizing how to run every SKU. What the client did was they kind of ran at the maximum labor needed for the maximum labor requirement of the most complex product all the time. So we found ways that we could manipulate the schedule so that, maybe the line starts up at 6 a.m. with the least labor requirements, and then people stagger in at 8:30 for a changeover for a more complex product, and so on and so forth. But by doing that, we were able to, over the course of 2 years, reduce the labor cost as a percent of revenue from 14% to 7% on $100 million. So that translates to literally $7 million in labor savings. And people think, well, labor savings means you're cutting people. It does not. It does not. It means getting the most pieces of throughput out for the man hours that you paid. Okay. So if you have a line that's producing, let's say, 10 widgets an hour, and you have 10 people on that line, okay, and we add one person to that line and they start spitting out 15 widgets, we just reduced their cost per widget, right? Because the labor content went up a little, but the throughput went up substantially.
So you made more pizzas and had less labor cost over time.
Yeah, and sometimes that meant adding labor to get that surge in throughput. Sometimes it meant, rather than shutting the line down between shifts, we would just pass the baton and there was zero downtime. We took the waste out.
Right.
So what is waste? It's downtime, it's waiting, it's searching, it's idle time,
Mm-hmm.
it's, rework, it's bad product,
Right.
it's all those things.
Okay. And you often use different terms, or you throw around terms: lean engineering, black belt in engineering. What is all of that, and what does that mean to you?
So those are lean terminologies for sure. Lean meaning the approach of engineering, the philosophy of reducing your costs, extracting that waste. A black belt is a certification in Six Sigma. Six Sigma is another approach. Um, I happen not to be a black belt, but have black belts on my team. Um, so those are just different terminologies and approaches for what we do. Yep.
Okay. In all of the clients that you have worked with, now you've really kind of gone a lot into the meat of what you do and some of the examples. What do you feel your role is? Because you're coming from a consulting side. And initially I thought consulting, you just went in, you kind of told them what to do, you left, but you're more implementing as well. What do you feel your role is, and what is your goal bringing your team into the company?
Yeah. So my role on my team side is to set them up with a project or projects so that they don't fail. Um, Supporting them, making sure that the project is realistic yet aggressive and challenging. I tell my team always over deliver. They have a massive amount of change, massive impact to do in a short amount of time. Could be 4 weeks, 12 weeks, 15 weeks on a project. My role with the client is, um, first of all, to identify where is the most meat to be had. Okay, what's the biggest return on their investment in us? I don't want to start something that's going to be a soft savings, like let's 5S this room. That's not going to necessarily produce more widgets. So, what I've gotten really good at, if I've gotten good at anything, is identifying what the first opportunity is to give them that huge bang for their buck right away. And then sometimes it's to kind of push back on the client. Sometimes they want to tell me how to do it, but they called me. And if I did it their way, then they wouldn't have reached out if their way necessarily worked.
Mhm.
That's not to say that there aren't times where um, I shouldn't take their input,
Mhm.
but sometimes they want me to do it in a very fixed, rigid way, and that way may lead to failure. So my responsibility to them at the end of the day is success.
Okay. And defining that success going in and
Mhm.
working with the team, not
Yes.
against the team.
Yes. So showing them how to measure, right? Showing them how to keep score so that we don't forget where we started from and where we're going.
And what is 5S? You mentioned that.
Yeah, 5S, it's kind of a Japanese buzzword, if you will, for there's actually several iterations of 5S, and I don't have it memorized, but it's basically sort, scrap, um, shine, standardize, sustain, I think is one iteration. It's going in and taking out things you don't need um, from an area and keeping exactly what you do need and giving it a place. And then typically like a shadow box or an outline for everything in that room.
And what do you find are some of the biggest challenges for you heading in to a new plant, a new client?
So I've gotten better about it in 23 years, but we are definitely drinking out of a fire hose the first week. I mean, it's just an immense amount of information to absorb, and learning also their vernacular, their language,
Mhm.
because every company, every plant has kind of its own, you know, wording for what they do, what they call this, what they call that. So it's learning that, and it's learning their constraints, so that we operate within the boundaries, so as not to disrupt their service level or their quality.
Yeah. I think one of the other things too, you and I talk about a lot is every plant is really its own little system. They have their own way of interacting,
Mhm.
their own infrastructure. That infrastructure is different from plant to plant. And so I think that's also a challenge too that we've talked about is, you're coming in with your team and kind of meeting them where they are and helping them to achieve their goals. And a lot of times that's embraced, and sometimes that's more of a challenge. But that is another thing that you and I have talked about a lot.
Yeah, I mean, most clients do embrace it. Every now and then, maybe corporate pushes us down into them. But at the end of the day, we're there to serve them and make it better for them.
So 23 years.
Mhm.
What is your favorite achievement?
Within my career,
Yeah.
gosh, that's a good question. Favorite achievement? I don't know that one sticks out. I think for me, the aha has become that every plant that I go to, every small business, every mid-sized business, certainly every large business, they are leaving no less than six figures, usually seven figures, sometimes eight figures of additional profit on the table. They're losing it. They're actually losing it. They might be profitable today, but they're losing that seven or eight figures and they don't know it. The old adage, if it's not broke, don't fix it.
Right.
They think it's not broke. But, pennies add up to dollars, dollars add up to thousands, thousands to millions. Um, so that's probably the biggest achievement, is just identifying that trend, that pattern, that any business, if you're doing, I'm going to say less than 20 million, for sure, there's six figures, maybe seven
Right.
on the table. North of 20 million, oh yeah, seven figures for sure.
And I think that's one of the gifts that you have. And you and I, we talk about engineering and that engineering mind frame. And I always joke, if you put a couple engineers in a room, they're always going to get together and be friends for forever. But really, it's that mindset. My mindset is always on production. If I do more, I'm going to make more. But you really are able to kind of tease out, well, wait a minute, if we're able to change and get rid of the waste. We're going to be saving more. We can take that money, put it back into production if we need to. There's so
Mm.
many different ways to do that, and I think a lot of people just don't focus on that.
They don't focus, they don't measure it. In 23 years, I have maybe sped up less than a handful of lines. I mean, I could count on one hand. Um, the solution is typically not speeding up. It's getting smarter
Mm-hmm.
and doing less. I'm sorry, doing more with less, or more with the same, and sometimes doing much more with a little more. Um, is what I have found.
Yeah. And it's just a different mindset, really. It is.
Yeah, and when you show them, the way,
Mm-hmm.
and again, we don't walk in with preconceived notions or a cookie cutter recipe, but when you show them a different way to do it, they respond positively and they kind of start to see, they learn to see. And then that momentum just builds and builds and builds.
And I think there's also kind of a wariness, well, at least in my industry, in the medical business, when big buyouts happen, we're always like, okay, they're going to be cutting staff, they're going to be cutting equipment, they're going to be cutting, everything that we need. And that's really not your MO. I mean, you often try to get in there and find those values that are just hidden in a lot of instances,
Yeah.
without massive deductions in staff and
No, no. Right now, the trend with all of our clients is growth, and if we find that there are extra labor content in their site, often they're able to reinvest that labor on another line, another project, another product. So the stars always align, is what I tell the clients. What is gratifying, though, is when a client will call back years later and we come and work on a new line, and their old line looks like I left yesterday, because we 5S it properly. We put the standards in place. The people own it. There's no reverting back because it's systemically changed, sometimes physically changed. There's just no going back.
right. So we talked about multiple different clientele that you have been able to service in the past, and that's variable in many different industries. What is one thing you want your clients to know before you or your team enter? What are their expectations? How should they plan for you to approach them?
Yeah, so we do talk in advance, and I make it pretty clear. I'll ask them, are there any sacred cows? Is there anything that we just absolutely don't don't go there, don't touch this, can't change that? And if the answer is no, then what I tell them is we're going to push the envelope. We're going to really push the envelope. Um, a lot of times we'll during the assessment we'll ask them, is there an area that we should start in, that has priority? Is there an area that's hemorrhaging that we should start in? But I think really their mindset is they're ready, they're eager to take the changes, and I feel like they're not going to know how this works until we just start. You know,
Right.
the hardest part sometimes is just getting them convinced, hey, do you want the same results you've been getting,
Mm-hmm.
or are you open to a different path, a different way? And then once they cross that mental barrier, it's go time.
And it seems like in the middle of a lot of your projects, there seems to be this aha moment where the light turns on and you get buy in
Hmm.
and you really begin to implement the changes. And at that point, the speed of the changes and the return of the results is so much more satisfying, I think, both to your team and then to the team that you're servicing. At the end of the project, what would you like your clients to know?
At the end of the project, well, they have the tool set, they have the skill set at that point to own it and sustain it. Um, you know, call us back if you're ready to do another one. We keep in touch. We definitely monitor results from afar, from remote. I think once they've just been through one project, they kind of learn the way.
Right.
Um, so I don't really leave with any departing advice other than we make sure that we're still monitoring their results,
Mhm.
and we stay in touch. And when they're ready, I'll say 9 times out of 10, we get a call back. Hey, come do this other area. Unless it's just a really tiny company that doesn't need us to come back,
Mhm.
we come back.
And what happens when they don't keep your implementations? The only thing I can think of is when you tried to engineer my kitchen. And that did not stick very well with the
Well, you
Italian
were not
side.
a paying client, so I
But
don't feel bad about that.
what happens if they don't? Are you able to be available to come in and reevaluate, reassess, train the team? Can you speak to that a little bit?
So as I said earlier, we actually systemically deliver the project, meaning it would be very difficult for them to unravel what we put into motion or put into place. So if anything, typically we'll get a call from a client after our departure, and they have better results because the momentum of the new process is taking shape, is taking form, almost like bread proofing. It'll continue to rise and their results continue to improve. So it's just very difficult for the client to, as I said earlier, undo what we fixed.
Mhm.
We have a client right now that has a very congested dock. They've got sort of three groups of people. They've got a receiving team, they've got a driver team getting orders, they've got a picking and shipping team, all this movement. We went in and we identified, well, we need to separate the shifts and
Mhm.
receive on day shift and pick at night, load the trucks at night. So we're literally flipping their world upside down. We're getting
Mhm.
people to come in now at 10 o'clock at night that used to come in at 5 a.m.
Right.
When you go
Just
through,
changes the process.
yeah, and when you go through that meaningful of change, and you, as I said, systemically change everything, they're going to reap such gains and benefits and um, reduction in congestion, reduction overtime, reduced costs. Why would they go back? So that's how we try to approach it, is to where it would be just so difficult to go back to the old way, and they don't want to.
Awesome. Well, thanks for letting me crash your party today.
You're
Your
welcome.
podcast 101
You're
001.
welcome. Yes. Thanks for joining. So that wraps up episode 001 with my lovely wife, Margot. Thank you for joining. Um, be sure to follow us on YouTube, LinkedIn, subscribe as a follower in the link below. We look forward to many, many more podcasts. They're going to be different time intervals, different guests, but um, really thought this first one valuable to kind of bring the wife in and just ask questions that maybe some of you are asking, some of the followers on LinkedIn. So thank you for joining, and stay tuned for the next episode coming shortly.